All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Max Rounds 30 podcast where there is no overtime. As usual, I am joined by Coy from MTU Esports, Jeff from Dust2 US, and I myself am a CSGO caster / guy for UW Whitewater Esports. In 30 minutes, we'll be covering all of this week's North American CSGO content. So to get things started, we'll get the timer rolling. And there we are, 30 minutes. So we've got some, I wouldn't call them illegal roster changes, but we've got some roster changes kind of popping up.
Post roster lock roster changes, in fact.
The most illegal of all roster changes. So kind of get things started out. We have some changes over at Rebirth with CJ going in to replace Rec, if I recall.
Yes.
Now, so far, what we've seen from that, it seems like that's a pretty good move, considering the way that CJ's been playing. But do you guys think that that really elevates the Rebirth roster in any way? Because it kind of feels like they're just always like right there at this like slightly underneath, like playing really well level, you know, where they're like always like the second or third team in a qualifier.
Well, they're like sort of like a revolving door of talent, kind of. So it makes it really hard to really like effectively analyze a team's performance when it's changing, like when the actual like core of the team is changing so often. So while I think, maybe this move might have some legs to it, we'll see how long it like really stays and if they're actually able to like get any real team stuff done in that time.
I think I think one of us mentioned the exact same thing last weekend because they had just changed a player last weekend. But there isn't really much to say about a team that's constantly changing players every week. And we can't really, we can't like analyze this roster when positions 4 and 5 in the lineup are subject to change constantly. So I don't know. CJ's probably worse than Rec mechanically, but more experience. But how much more experience is anyone's guess? Because I don't really feel like he's the CJ of years gone by. I don't know. Like this feels like a neutral roster move to me that doesn't really improve the team or move it in any one direction. It just feels like it's more just instability and just randomness from the Rebirth guys. Like I think their peak is gone. Like I think the peak when they had their roster Dreamhack January, like I think that period's come and gone when they had Curry.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. I mean, it kind of feels like we've seen them just repeatedly, like I said, they're always second or third in like the various NA qualifiers for things. Like they're never quite able to get over that hump to get into things. And, and these are qualifiers where it's not entirely top teams. So it's not like they're really proving anything yet. So I think we'll have to see some stability before we can see anything crazy happen there. So
yeah, I just looked at the show notes and we literally said the exact same thing during last week's episode where we basically said, well, Raph's pretty good, but Sixy's also pretty good, but they change their roster so often, it could really be a toss-up. And now we're saying Rec's pretty good. Well, CJ's pretty good, but it's a toss-up. So who knows with those Rebirth guys? Like it's...
Yeah, it kind of feels like, they're searching for maybe like some sort of team chemistry to
if
like
this
just line
team's
up
remembered for anything, it'll be remembered as it'll be remembered as just a revolving door. Like,
yeah, well, speaking of revolving doors, GGPR as of just not necessarily, but like they've had some interesting changes. I'd consider we'd have a revolving door with Poison out after what, 2 maps?
2 maps, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Get slapped by Bad News Bears and then leave.
Yeah. And the presumption is that Shawniak's coming in because he is currently, at the time of recording, the only other player paid up, and their only other options would be their coach, who's a 1.6 player, or the owner, or some random ringer they added. So you have to assume it's in Shawniak. And when you look at it, Shawniak is a better player than Poison. But then at the same time, if you're going to cut Poison after 2 maps, that means you either didn't view him as someone who could actually replace, someone who could be the future of this roster. And so if that's true, then what's the point of bringing him on? Like, GDPR at that point in the season had aspirations of going to playoffs. Now it's looking unlikely. But if that's true, why add Poison then if you didn't think he could actually perform?
Well, my take on Poison is that he was and like kind of still is like he's a promising candidate to make this next step to the next level, right? Because he had a lot of experience in advanced, and he like statistically is a pretty all right player. Like he's not bad by any means. He's pretty unexperienced, but they were just taking a gamble, I feel, and maybe something behind the scenes didn't work out, or maybe he's like playing differently in matches than he was in his original trial period or something. So I don't want to like necessarily write it off too hard. I think that, they took a risk and maybe that risk didn't work out. But it is unfortunate to see it happen so late, right when they're on the cusp of that playoff spot.
You kind of do have to lean to it being something out of the server, right? Because otherwise it'd be extremely harsh for them to cut a player after two maps against the best team.
Exactly.
One of the best team or one of the best teams in Premier. Like, you can't exactly bring in an advanced player, have him get bodied by Banyas Bears and be like, see, you are shit. Yeah. So you would hope it's something outside of the server. If not, like, it's a harsh cut, and it just feels like like I said, a waste of time and a waste of his play. Like, he left a team in advance that was doing fine enough, and it must mean he was getting some form of payment on STMN. So like, and he's getting to farm all those Mexican tournaments. So it's just it's a weird addition and a weird subtraction. Like,
yeah. I'd have to agree with you with like that probably just being kind of like a backdoor, like a behind the scenes kind of deal, where it's like it probably wasn't like, of course, performance on server could have maybe been a factor, but at the same time, it's like how quick that was. Surely there's got to be something else that's going on there. So to kind of like continue our whole saga of revolving doors, though, we actually also have some interesting changes with Imperium. So Newt is out, their coach, as of, what was that, on March 26th. And we've also got Sherps posting like LFT. Like, it's concerning, I guess you'd say, because Imperium's been like, we've been repeating the mantra, it can only be up from here. And here we are reaching the end of the season, still no wins, and they're just, it's starting to look like they might be falling apart here at the end of the season.
Yeah.
It definitely, like, they've been improving steadily throughout the season, but I don't think they improved fast enough to be considered as like a real premier lineup. And we know Sherp's looking at his options. We know Newt is looking at his options. We've heard rumors that Wilkie's looking at his options. And so I don't think this is a team we'll ever really see again after they play the commission. I think on Wednesday, they'll just sort of fade into the history books as another one of Imperium's rosters that didn't really deliver. So I guess the only appropriate analysis we can really do is a post-mortem of this team. What do you guys think? Like, what was this team's problem?
On one hand, we can always just like we can obviously kind of point fingers at Fallon's underperforming and those sort of problems, but at its core, like, it just felt like there just wasn't quite enough experience amongst all of the players playing together with those roster changes that just came a little bit too late in the season. I feel that they could put up results, but they weren't actually convincing enough to like win the series. Like, they'd take a map here and there, or they'd play a map really close, or they'd have a good showing in a weekend tournament or something. And they just didn't quite have the ability to bring that chemistry to the level where it would matter.
And I think I agree with you there.
That's probably the most.
Yeah, like it just feels like the move was too late, so they were kind of doomed from when that move happened, simply because they got Atomic, they got Wilkie, and those two and Sharps played pretty excellent. They were always for the most part, they were like almost always positive in any series they played, and they were always like they played pretty decent, but they didn't really have any of that experience or that like X factor to like actually close out their series. It didn't feel like they had the right players to finish it out. So it felt always like a 3-person match whenever we got into those. So it just felt like it happened too late. And I agree. It felt like, they just didn't have the experience coming into the remaining part of the season. They didn't have that time to play together and to try and get better. So, it's kind of like it went from it's only up from here to there's not enough time to get up and you've drowned because,
do you think,
too much water
I
between
mean,
you and the
on
surface.
reflection, whatever we'll never know what Valens brought to the table, but was it worth it?
I mean, in a team like that where you have some underperformers, like it comes down to how the team utilizes their function on the server in a non-fragging way, right? So whether that's throwing all your flashes or going in first or getting traded or peeking together, those kinds of things that if they had the time to like actually set those protocols and actually work together in an offline server and figure out what they're doing, I have a feeling that they would have been fine. They would have taken series. Like they would have done well. And so maybe it was just their practice routine or their lack of experience together, but like that's really just how I think.
Do you think that team would have been better served by Valens just being like the coach from the start or something? Like
probably.
That's kind of what I'm thinking is like if he wants to still be like involved in the scene, then maybe he should consider coaching because I feel like he can still provide value to teams he plays with, but
yeah, unfortunately, if you look, he's got good RWS, like because he's a very supportive player. But at the same time, it's like you can only support so much before you actually do just need to get the kills.
Exactly.
Yeah, like even against teams that you wouldn't say are like even against teams that you wouldn't say are like top premier sides like Levitate, for example, he's putting up like he's putting up 0.38 ratings against Levitate in the recent Invitational. So like, what can you really do at that point? I mean,
well, besides our postmortem for Imperium, I mean, we were talking pre-show how this could be like this will probably likely end up being just like the last couple of weeks for them, and then they'll probably get dropped or something. But to kind of take into the biggest events of this last week here, we had DreamHack Open March. So we had a lot of strong teams. It was basically like an immediate peek into Premier playoffs. So, we had a lot of really interesting things that went on, but to kind of get us started, we had we'll just kind of go team by team here, and we'll start to kind of pick things apart. So we'll kind of open things up with RBG. They were promising. They played decently again. I think it was promising personally because I watched their series against Liquid and they looked good on Nuke.
They looked real good. Like they could have beat fucking Liquid on Nuke, which is unfathomable. Like
the thing that pained me so much too, and this is just from a caster's perspective. You'll have to pardon me here because I'm gonna like. It felt like the casters that we had knew nothing about either team. They didn't even know that Liquid had, 3 major titles, or how many was it?
Apparently you don't. Apparently
I don't
really
even know it either. But I know that there's two players on Liquid that have major wins.
That's not good, folks.
But that's the thing though, is that they didn't even they were like, oh, they forgot about Stewie entirely. I'm sorry, just like. It felt like the casters for DreamHack Open March just didn't know anything about NA teams, and they just kind of went on about the same trope of, oh, team good because we know about them a little bit, and then team bad, but they really talked down on RBG a lot despite their performance, and they found themselves going back on that when they're like, oh, their whole go A thing actually works because they actually have a planned strat out instead of just rush A repeat. Like, it felt very brain dead. But to kind of re-rail us here, after that, Hex played really well. Hex, ended up with like a 1.2 rating on Duke, 0.97 on Mirage, but I mean, they did kind of get absolutely, slammed on Mirage, but like overall, it felt like 3/5 of the team showed up to this series,
I think it was really important for them to actually like, play so well in that first map and stuff, because that, keep in mind, like that's the first time in a while that we've actually really been able to have the tier 2 teams here in NA, play up against those international titans, right? So there is life in the tier 2 scene, even if
Yeah.
it's not able to quite close out maps, which is fine.
I think we kind of all expected them not to, one, make it out of their group, and two, probably not win a series. But, considering how stacked this event was, the fact that they didn't just get demolished completely is like promising. Like, we don't know if it's going to be a thing. I think the biggest takeaway from this for RBG is that considering how well they did in this event, it makes you like excited for playoffs when they play teams that are more at their level. Like, I think they can make a deep run in Premier playoffs. Like, that's not out of the question for them. I think they're one of the underdog teams in Premier playoffs, considering they don't have any of the new old generation of players. But like, they're going to be exciting to watch. Like, I like the way I think they play very good. I think they play very good Counter Strike, and I think they're a good team to watch.
Yeah, I agree. Because like I just enjoy watching Hext. Honestly, Hext is just fun to watch. Just I mean, we were talking pre-show. It's like he's an aimer, but like it just feels good. It feels like they've got good protocols. They're just playing well. Like,
well, some of them have been together for so long that kind of chemistry that they naturally have is just going to be so valuable, especially going forward, because we only have a month of off season in between seasons now.
We'll be right into season 37 before we know it.
And so that's only going to get better with time.
Yeah. And to kind of finish out their run, they lost to High Coast after the Liquid loss.
Expected, fair, All right, so moving on to Bad News Bears. So in their first match of the series, they cleaned up a Rebirth, and then they lost to Extra Salt and closed the event out by getting slammed by Pain. But there is one big caveat to that event, is that after their first map against Rebirth, they had to use Rezu in place of Janji due to the former player having to, I believe, move houses. So do we think this is like a butterfly effect convergence in history? Do you think do we think this still would have happened to Bad News Bears if they had Janji?
No, probably not.
The crazy thing to think about is they definitely have like a fair fuck's chance of beating Extra Salt, I think, considering they've done it before in Premier in a best of 3 format. So, they beat Rebirth, they beat Extra Salt, they're in playoffs, like they're in top 4. Like that's definitely something that could have happened. So it's like a disappointing thing for them. But what are our thoughts about Bad News Bears with Rezu? Like, what does it tell us about them? Anything?
Honestly, it just, to me, it kind of feels like Janji's an important piece to that puzzle, right? I think that's what that tells us. I
think he's their star player on that team.
Yeah, I mean, that and Swish. I mean, Swisher just has like a tendency to like have on or off games. He's not the most consistent player on the roster, but like it kind of feels like they are.
He has the ability to step up if it's needed.
Yeah, definitely.
But if he goes missing and Janji's not there, then problems are going to start coming.
Yeah, and it felt like Peter was missing some shots that he shouldn't have throughout the event. So like I don't know if it was just like it just kind of felt like an off event for Bad News Bears, and then of course they get slammed by Pain on Inferno. That was like what, a 16-2 and
16-2 and
yeah, it was just it felt very off from them, and of course we had our our regular trading of 2-1s between them and Extra Salt and
the El Clasico of NA. Yeah.
So Bad News Bears overall, it kind of just felt like a bad.
Unfortunate. Don't think you can really draw many conclusions from it. When Janji's back in the lineup, get ready.
Mm-hmm. So going into our another team here, we got Triumph. So this was kind of a tale of Cynic being nuts and playing like a madman throughout like the entire event.
What did I say? I think last episode I said Cynic is the truth. what does he do? He is the truth.
he is the truth. Yeah.
He is the truth.
Yeah, it felt really good. They had the 2-1 over High Coast. They did get 0-2, they got 2-0 by Liquid. And then they had a 2-1 a 1-2 to High Coast.
That match was a fucking heartbreaker though for Triumph. Like
yeah.
that series went down to the wire on multiple occasions. That's like a coin flip series in my mind, where if a different strat is chose on a different round, or if a player hits a shot that he misses, like that can go either way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's that it was a little unfortunate for Triumph the way that they kind of fell out, but at the same time, it kind of didn't super feel like we had everybody else on Triumph really perform. So I mean, Cynic was nuts. I mean, he had like a 1.16 rating against Liquid over the whole series, and had above a 1.2 rating, almost a 1.3 against High Coast in both of their matchups. It kind of just felt like an instance where Triumph had like they had like half of their team kind of firing on all cylinders, and then the other half was just kind of a little bit quiet,
Yeah, I bet this is another team where it's like I'm not necessarily that concerned about them. I feel like this was just like, if anything, this proved that Cynic was a smart pickup for the team, and it's a smart pickup for the team, and they should just keep improving from here. So
yeah, honestly, it'll be interesting to see. Like, this is always a team, in my opinion, that was going to scale best with time, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And the effort that was put in off season and practices and stuff like that. And when you're jumping between events and things like that, it's a little challenging to get that important time in. So it should just keep going up.
Yeah, I think this team will just age like a fine wine, and I think they're looking at it right now. I think they're the one that becomes the competitor, like the domestic competitor to Extra Salt.
Absolutely.
Personally, I think my goal for the future of this division is it's like a 3-way battle between Bad News Bears, Extra Salt, and Triumph, where I'm hoping that Triumph is the team that slightly like lags behind. I mean, Bad News Bears is the team that slightly lags behind just because they're more a temperamental team, and they're also organizationless, so they have less support behind the scenes. But for me, I think it's going to be the Triumph Extra Salt show. Hopefully, that's what I would like to see.
Not to discount High Coast, though.
No, I mean this was a good fucking event for High Coast too.
High Coast, they showed up for the most part.
They showed up. I mean, I think we can now. The jury is out on this. Is that MOTM was a smart pickup for them. Like,
absolutely, he totally revitalized that roster.
Mm-hmm. I mean, they took a map off of Extra Salt. They made it one map deeper than Triumph into the event, or one series deeper into the event, and they played really well into they had that 2-0 over Bad News Bears, which again we can't really read too much into because they didn't have Janji, and they came back after losing to them initially when they did have Janji, and then it felt like they played pretty well into things, and the fact that they did in fact get a map off of Extra Salt, and they've been there in the past where they've actually beaten Extra Salt. Like, it feels like Extra Salt are definitely like kind of like still above them, but it feels like once we know what the consistency is for these teams, I think then we'll start to kind of see how that hierarchy lays out for who ends up getting that Pro League spot.
And then speaking of Extra Salt, I think we need to talk about them now as our final team to talk about for this. I think they've arrived. Like, I think with the addition of Marquee plus time plus Fang being more embedded, like I think they've arrived.
Well, and also now that they're going to be spending some time in EU too, like they should be able to get a lot of valuable experience now together as a team, and that's gonna just only make them better, in my opinion.
Yeah,
but
I mean,
by no means are they immortal. That's the big thing still. I definitely think there's totally ways that they get, upset. And
by Bad News Bears, for example.
Yeah, and so while I'm, definitely going to be favoring them in a lot of these games they have coming up, I would not be surprised if something went the other way.
Yeah. I'm happy for them. That's the main takeaway is I'm happy they win. I think now we can definitively say they're probably the best team, best domestic NA team, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah.
And like the thing that, so like, this I think is like where we finally get to see what Cloud9 should have been if like they had allowed the team to make roster changes, which of course they didn't. So because like we saw that ATK full squad, they went and played a couple of lands and they didn't really do anything mega impressive. Like they showed up and they played, but they did exactly how like a relatively new roster should. But now that they are qualified into IEM Summer 2021, like this roster is going to be like, I think this is like where we finally get to see them play super like this is where we get to see the final form, like before we get into things. So besides that, speaking of Cloud9, of course, they are now above them in the HLTV World Rankings. Not too much to say there, but of course it led to a lot of very interesting Twitter banter.
a lot of the circle jerk. On one side you have the circle jerk, on the other side you have the anti-circle jerk, where it's like, haha, Cloud9, and it's like, no, they're actually good, just give them more time. It's like, okay.
Yeah. And we can't really move on without quickly mentioning Liquid getting knocked out by Pain. I think we do have to kind of mention that a little bit. There was a bit of, whether or not they're going to put it down to ping or whatnot, but it was just like, I don't know. What are your guys' thoughts on that? It was just weird.
Ping. I mean, I feel like if Fallen was with the guys and they were able to play with good ping, like I think it would have gone differently. Like I said in last episode, if they lost, it would have to have been something ridiculous, or they, or I'd be incredibly disappointed. I am still disappointed because Grim, fell asleep largely, but yeah, I think like that's the main takeaway. They should have won. They didn't. It's sad. There's a good excuse. Grim fell asleep. Let's move on. Let's move on. Hopefully they do better in Europe against real teams with acceptable levels of paying.
Yeah. And of course there was like a whole thing on Twitter with the Leech, but we don't need to get into that.
So just to talk real quick about the last notable events of the week, we had the 2 Ven Invitational qualifiers. And besides the ping issues, just look at the results. We have RBG qualifying from the first event, and we have Levitate qualifying for the second. These are both relatively surprising because in the first one, RBG beat Rebirth, falls shorts once again, and then Levitate beats Secret Comp in the second one. Can't really read into that one because they had to use Finn for the first map and had to use Rec for the whole event to place a jitter. So that's good. Moving on to the results from last week in Premier, there's not really a whole lot to read into here, except for the one big one where Bad News Bears beats Extra Salt 2-0. This came before the DreamHack Masters March, the DreamHack Open March, which was, a bit of a surprise at the time, and it gives you hope that Bad News Bears are, still a competition for Extra Salt, but that does mean they will likely secure the first seed with their favorite record. So exciting news for the Bad News Bears. Also, let's see. That's basically in terms of notable results. The rest of them were relatively one-sided affairs. And now before we close out the episode, let's go over our matches to catch. For me, it's going to be Mythic versus Extra Salt. This match will likely determine who in Group A gets the second highest seed. Extra Salt should win it, but I think it could still be interesting.
All right, Koi. Oh, he's muted.
For me, it's gonna be Triumph versus RBG, just because. We just saw what Triumph could do with Cynic. That was a fantastic showing from him individually, and now that we're gonna have them play a little bit more together, I think that it's really going to show just how far they can go. And then RBG is just, it feels like they're the underdogs in any situation, except they're still within a striking distance all the time. So it'll be really interesting to see how that best of 3 series plays out.
All right. And then we've got my match, which I kind of copped out. And I think that watch any game with either Rebirth, Secret Club, Third Impact, or Recon 5 in it, because it's going to be setting up what our final picture is for that final Group B playoff spot for next week. So to kind of give us our last 30 seconds, we've got our match to miss. And Jeff, I believe you're the one who chose it for
I
this
will
week.
bear this horrible burden, and shockingly, it is not watch this because I'm just so tired of it. I think for me, it's going to be the Imperium versus the Commission because the Imperium have a monumental task ahead of them is to win one match this season, and they don't really have a whole lot to play for because they will likely be going to relegation either way. And so I think it doesn't have any bearing on anyone else in the division. And
All
that's
right.
it.
Yep, and that's it for today's episode. Thank you, everybody, for either watching or for listening. We will be back next week for the final week of NA Premiere and all of that content, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you for watching. Goodbye.
Peace.
Bye.